Rose Daniels was carrying a tray of sparkling water when she heard the lie that was about to cost a very powerful man everything he had spent 15 years building. She didn't stop walking, didn't flinch, didn't tilt the tray even a fraction of a degree in any direction. That was the thing about working at the Caldwell, Chicago's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, perched 42 floors above the Gold Coast like a rumor only the right people were allowed to confirm. You learned something in this place that no amount of formal training could give you. You learned how to make your entire face say absolutely nothing while everything inside you was on fire. It was a skill that took most servers months to develop. Rose had walked in with it already built. She had been building it in various rooms for 3 years before she ever set foot in this restaurant. But that part of the story comes a little later. Rose set the glasses down at table 3, smiled in the way that is not quite a smile, and disappeared. Then she circled back toward table 11 and listened harder. The 2 men at that table were not speaking English. One of them never did. And that was the problem neither of them knew they had yet. Before we go any further, have you ever been in a room where you understood something that nobody knew you could understand? Where you caught a lie mid-air and had to decide in about 4 seconds flat whether to let it land or reach out and stop it? That is exactly where Rose Daniels is standing right now. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have said something? Hold that answer in your mind, because by the end of this story, you might be surprised by what you decide. Subscribe if you haven't already, and stay with me, because what happens next is going to change everything. Table 11 sat in the far corner of the Caldwell's private dining room. A room within a room, separated from the main floor by etched glass panels and a level of curated privacy that cost extra, came without questions, and was specifically designed to make certain kinds of conversations feel safe. 3 men, 1 table, a contract sitting in the center of it like a loaded weapon, wearing the costume of paperwork. Rose had been assigned to the private room specifically because she was good at being invisible. Not just in the practiced professional way of experienced hospitality staff who know when to appear and when to vanish. Something older and deeper than that, an invisibility that had been sharpened over years of rooms where being noticed meant being accountable for things that were not her doing. She had learned, at some cost she preferred not to calculate, exactly how to take up no space. 5 months she had worked at the Caldwell. 5 months of carrying plates that cost more than her electric bill, smiling at men who looked through her like she was part of the furniture, and going home to a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park where the only thing waiting was a stack of medical invoices from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Her mother's name at the top, a number at the bottom that made Rose's throat close every single time she looked at it. She had a system for the invoices. She kept them in a folder in the kitchen drawer, and she only opened the folder on the 1st of the month, when she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and worked through the math. She was always working through the math. The math did not always work, but she worked through it anyway because the alternative was to not look at it, and she had learned, at considerable personal cost, that not looking at things did not make them go away. She was invisible by necessity. She needed this job. But some lies are loud enough that even the most invisible woman in the room cannot walk past them without feeling it in her bones. The man at the head of table 11 was Clifford Marsh, British-Australian, mid-50s, with the particular brand of easy confidence that belongs to people who have never once been told no and have fully stopped expecting it. He had the sunburned forehead of a man who owned boats and the manicured hands of a man who had other people sail them. Everything about him communicated ownership. The unhurried way he occupied his chair, the way he handled the menu like it was a document he had already approved, the particular quality of his laugh, which was the laugh of someone who had decided he was the most interesting person at the table and was simply waiting for everyone else to confirm it. Beside him sat a younger man, Marcus Lyle, sharp navy suit, sharper smile, the kind of face that made you want to trust it right up until the precise moment you understood that the face was the entire product. Rose had seen faces like his before. She had trusted one once. She knew exactly what lived behind that particular kind of easy, practiced charm. And across from them both, completely still, completely composed, the kind of stillness that does not come from peace but from absolute control, sat Jin Hae-won. Rose had noticed him the moment he walked through the Caldwell's entrance, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that it would have been essentially impossible not to. He was somewhere in his early 40s, Korean, dressed simply, which in this context meant a steel grey suit that had been built specifically for his frame and probably cost more than 3 months of Rose's rent combined. He moved through the room with the particular ease of a man who had decided long ago that every room he walked into already belonged to him in some fundamental way. Not arrogance exactly, something more settled than arrogance. Arrogance has an edge to it, a need to be seen. This was something different. This was a man who didn't need the room to know. He simply did. His right hand, a broad, quiet man named Eli, who communicated almost exclusively in economical movements, had positioned himself near the private room entrance without being told and had not moved since. He stood with the practiced stillness of someone who had made invisibility a discipline rather than a skill. Rose recognized that quality too. She and Eli, she thought, had probably read the same room 1,000 times from the same side of it. Rose took their drink orders. Jin Hae-won ordered in Korean. The younger man, Marcus, translated it to her without looking up from his phone, like the act of looking at her while he did it would have cost him something he wasn't willing to spend. She wrote it down, she walked away, and that would have been the end of it. Another invisible moment in an invisible shift. Another evening she would take the train home and not think about. Except that as she turned away from the table, the contract lawyer seated to Jin Hae-won's left, a German man named Rolf Bauer, silver-haired, reading glasses pushed to the end of his nose, muttered something under his breath in German. Something quiet and precise and absolutely not intended to carry. It carried. Rose kept walking, but her mind stopped completely. Here is the thing that nobody at table 11 knew about the quiet black woman refilling their water glasses. Rose Daniels was not always a waitress. 3 years ago, she was one of the most respected certified translators in the Midwest. Fluent in 6 languages, English, German, French, Portuguese, Mandarin, and Japanese, she had built a career interpreting high-stakes international contracts for law firms, corporations, and 2 separate consular offices. She had an office with her name on the door, a reputation that took 4 years to build, a future she could see the shape of clearly, the way you can see a city coming into view from a highway at night, lit up and waiting. She had started her translation career straight out of graduate school at 24. Renting a desk in a shared office space in the West Loop and taking every contract she could find, working evenings and weekends, building a client list 1 referral at a time. By 27, she had a proper office. By 28, she had a partner. And then Derek happened. Derek Channing, her business partner. The man she had trusted completely, the man she had gone into business with at 28 because he was smart and charming and believed in her in a way that felt at the time like the rarest thing in the world. He had a gift for the business side of things, the pitching, the schmoozing, the networking lunches, and she had the languages, the precision, the ear for what was actually being said beneath what was being communicated. They had been for 2 years genuinely good together, the kind of professional partnership where the sum is meaningfully larger than its parts. She had believed in it. She had believed in him, the man who spent nearly 2 years quietly falsifying translations on contracts for clients she had never met, redirecting funds through accounts she had never seen, and who, when the whole structure finally collapsed under its own weight, had spent the preceding 6 months making absolutely certain that Rose's signature, Rose's credentials, and Rose's name were on every document that mattered. It was perfectly done, she had to give him that. Not a single document with his name alone, always hers at the bottom, or both of theirs, or just hers, because he had understood, somewhere around month 8 of the scheme, that her name was the one that carried the weight. Her license, her reputation, her 4 years of impeccable work. He had borrowed all of it, leaned on all of it, and when the bill came due, he was already 3 months into building a new version of himself somewhere else. She lost her license. She lost her clients. She lost the savings account that had taken her 5 years to build, and when her mother Gloria got sick, a diagnosis that arrived like a letter with no return address, Rose lost the luxury of falling apart. So she put on a white uniform, learnt to be invisible, and tried very hard every single day to forget that she could hear 6 languages the way most people hear music. Not just the words, everything underneath them, the hesitation between sentences, the thing a person does with their breathing when they are saying one thing and meaning another. The truth hiding inside what isn't being said. She had not used her languages professionally in 3 years. She used them privately and constantly and completely without choosing to. In the Caldwell's kitchen when the sous chef argued with the line cook in rapid French. On the train when the 2 women behind her conducted a full domestic negotiation in Mandarin. In the dry cleaners where the owner spoke to his mother on the phone in Portuguese so fast it sounded like weather. She heard all of it. She filed none of it. She had decided that the languages were just something she carried now, like the scar on her left wrist from a childhood burn, present, not deployed. She was at the service station pretending to organize the linen cart when Marcus Lyle committed the first real crime of his evening. Rolf Bauer had leaned forward and raised a specific concern in clear, professional German. His voice was measured and careful, the voice of a man who has learned to say difficult things without raising the temperature of the room to do it. He was talking about a clause in the contract. Clause 6, asset protection upon investor default. He said with complete precision that the current language created what he called an untenable exposure for the primary investing party, and that he could not, in good conscience, advise proceeding without a significant amendment to that language. Marcus Lyle smiled across the table at Jin Hae-won. In Korean, he said that the German lawyer was satisfied with the risk structure and had complimented the clarity of the legal drafting. The room didn't change. Nobody's glass fell over. Clifford Marsh nodded at the table and made a small, satisfied sound. Jin Hae-won received this translation with the same controlled, unreadable stillness he brought to everything, made a brief sound of acknowledgement, and returned his attention to the contract page in front of him. Rose stood at the linen cart with a folded napkin in her hands and felt something ignite in her chest that had been cold for 3 years. She recognized this. She had lived it from the inside. She had been on the other side of exactly this kind of silence, raising concerns in a language nobody was honestly translating, watching a room nod and move forward while she shouted into a void only she could hear. The question was what she was going to do about it now. She set the napkin down on the cart, not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement. The way you set something down when you have decided it doesn't matter and you are ready to pick up something that does. She turned back toward table 11. Her colleague Priya caught her arm on the way past. Priya had been at the Coldwell for 2 years, and she had a precise, reliable radar for the specific kind of situation that ended shifts early and permanently. Her expression right now said the radar was going off at full volume. Table 7 needs their appetizer checked, and Gerald's been watching the floor all night. A pause, a look that said, "I like you, and I do not want to attend your professional funeral tonight." Don't give him a reason, Rose. Cover for me, Rose said quietly. Not quite a request. Priya looked at her face. Whatever she saw there, she let go of her arm without another word. If you're feeling this story right now, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because this is only the beginning, and I promise you are not prepared for where it goes. Now let's keep going. Rose moved back toward the private dining room the way she always moved. Unhurried, purposeful, invisible on the outside, with everything on the inside running at full speed. This was the thing about having the kind of gift Rose had. The gift for language that went deeper than vocabulary and grammar, that lived in the body the way rhythm lives in a musician. It meant you could not hear a lie in a language you knew without your entire nervous system responding to it. Not with outrage, not always. Sometimes just with a cold, specific clarity. The way a doctor hears something wrong in a heartbeat before they name what it is. She topped up Rolf Bauer's water glass. She adjusted the position of a bread roll plate that nobody had touched. She listened. Rolf was speaking again. Still German, still precise, but with an edge underneath it now. The controlled frustration of a man who has raised the same concern twice and received, both times, an answer that makes no sense relative to what he actually said. He had the particular energy of someone who is starting to wonder if the translation is the problem but cannot quite bring himself to say so out loud in this room, with these people, at this table. He pointed to a specific page in the contract, tapped it once with his index finger. His voice remained professional. But his voice was doing the thing that voices do when professional is being used as a container for something much louder. He was talking about the profit split, 50-50. That was what had been agreed in principle across 4 months of preliminary negotiations. That was what every document leading up to this evening's contract reflected. Handshakes confirmed, emails confirmed, a term sheet that both parties had initialed on page 4. But the contract sitting on that table right now, the one Clifford Marsh was methodically steering Jin Hae-won towards signing before the main course arrived, read 60-40 in Marsh's favor. The language was buried in a subclause on page 14, written in the kind of dense, technical phrasing that assumed no one on the receiving end would read German carefully enough to catch it, or care enough to say so. Rolf caught it. Rolf cared. Rolf was saying so with all the measured professional force available to him. Marcus Lyle smiled pleasantly and told Jin Hae-won in Korean that the German lawyer was asking whether the wine was a domestic selection. Rose set down the water pitcher. She stood very still for a moment, just a moment, long enough to feel it fully, the specific, precise weight of what she had just heard, and the specific, precise weight of what that made her next move. She thought about her mother, Gloria Daniels, lying in a room at Northwestern Memorial with an oar line in her arm and a smile she wore every time Rose walked in, so that Rose wouldn't see exactly how much it was costing her to hold herself together. Gloria, who had worked doubles for 12 years to send her daughter to university, who had sat in the third row at Rose's graduation and cried the kind of tears that are not sadness but the physical release of something enormous. Relief, pride, the specific vindication of sacrifice, who had cried again at Rose's certification ceremony with the unself-conscious fullness of a woman who had earned the right to cry at something like that, who had never once, not after Derek, not after the license, not after the savings disappeared and the future they had been quietly planning became a present they were simply trying to survive, never once told Rose to make herself smaller to fit the life she'd been handed. And that mattered. Rose had thought about that constantly in the 3 years since the collapse. How her mother had never once said, maybe this is just where you are now, maybe this is the life you have, never suggested Rose adjust her sense of herself downward to match the circumstances. Gloria had simply, silently, consistently refused to let her daughter shrink, even from a hospital bed, maybe especially from a hospital bed. She thought about sitting in a hearing room 3 years ago, understanding with the precise and specific agony of someone who speaks 6 languages, every single word being said about her. Every piece of evidence described, every document held up and attributed, watching the case built against her out of her own credentials, her own name, her own professional life, carefully and methodically arranged by a man who had already decided she would take the fall and had made his peace with it months before she had any idea it was coming. She had been Rolf Bauer once, raising concerns in a language nobody was honestly translating, watching the room move forward while she screamed into a silence that nobody else could hear. She was finished with silence. Rose straightened her uniform, took one slow, clean breath, the kind that isn't about calm but about clarity, about knowing exactly what you are about to do and deciding to do it anyway. She walked into the private dining room with the specific and particular calm of a woman who is already paid. She didn't approach Clifford Marsh. She didn't approach Marcus Lyle. She went directly to Jin Hae-won. She approached his side of the table, leaned forward slightly, respectful, composed, her voice pitched low enough that it did not carry beyond the 4 people immediately around her. Mr. Jin, I apologize for the interruption. I understand this isn't my place. Every eye at the table turned to her. Clifford Marsh's expression moved from mild surprise to sharp irritation in approximately the time it takes to blink. The irritation of a man who has arranged everything very carefully and does not appreciate furniture that has decided to have opinions. Marcus Lyle went very still, the particular stillness of someone who has been caught doing something and is running rapid calculations about what to do next. His smile was gone. In its absence, his face looked younger and considerably less trustworthy. Jin Hae-won looked at her, just looked at her. His face gave away nothing, not annoyance, not curiosity, not any emotion she could read with any certainty. But he didn't raise a hand. He didn't look away or signal to Eli by the door. He simply waited, with the patience of a man who has learned, probably at significant cost, that the most unexpected source in any room is usually worth at least a few seconds of attention. Your translator has not accurately conveyed a single concern Mr. Bauer has raised in the last 25 minutes, Rose said. She kept her eyes on Jin Hae-won. Steadily. Mr. Bauer has raised 2 specific objections to clauses in this contract. Clause 6, asset protection upon investor default, which he states creates an untenable legal exposure for the primary investing party and cannot, in his professional opinion, be signed as written. And the profit distribution, which he has confirmed, reads 60-40 in Mr. Marsh's favor, despite a 50-50 agreement in every preliminary document leading to tonight. The silence that followed had weight and texture to it, the kind of silence that is not the absence of sound but the presence of everyone in the room processing the same thing at the same time. Clifford Marsh leaned back in his chair. She's a server. His voice was the clipped, dismissive tone of a man accustomed to using status as a weapon. A man who believed with complete conviction that what you are determines what you are allowed to know. Rose held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at Jin Hae-won. Clause 6, she said again, still completely level. Mr. Bauer's exact words were that he cannot in good conscience recommend signing until the language is substantially amended. Your translator told you he was satisfied with the risk structure. Rolf Bauer had gone completely still. He was looking at Rose with an expression she recognized immediately. She had felt that expression from the inside. It was the stunned, breathless relief of a person who has been shouting into an empty room and has just discovered the room was not empty at all. He looked briefly like a man who had been holding his breath for 25 minutes and had just been given permission to exhale. He spoke German, direct and precise, every word carefully chosen, the grammar exact, a man making a formal record. She is entirely correct. Every word she has said accurately reflects what I said. Rose translated it before anyone asked her to. Her voice was steady and unhurried, as if she had been doing this every day for years. Because she had done it every day for years. The fact that she had been carrying it in a white apron for the last 36 months did not make the skill any less available when she needed it. He says I'm correct, every word. Jin Hae-won had not moved, had not looked away from her face for the duration of this exchange. His eyes were dark, and up close she could see now that they were not as unreadable as she had initially thought. Something was moving behind that stillness, something she couldn't name yet, something that had not been there when she walked in. He turned his head slowly toward Marcus Lyle. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. Marcus opened his mouth, looked at Jin Hae-won's face, closed it again. Whatever calculation he had been running, it had just returned no viable options. The practiced smile was gone completely now, and without it his face was just a face. Younger than it looked with the performance on, considerably less certain. Get out, Clifford Marsh said it quietly, but he wasn't looking at Rose when he said it. He was looking at Marcus. The weight of years of very carefully constructed confidence had fallen off his voice completely. What was underneath it was smaller and older and considerably less impressive. Get out now. Ellie opened the door without being asked. The timing of it, the door already moving before the words were finished, communicated something clearly about how long Ellie had been watching and what he had understood. Marcus Lyle picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft final click that somehow carried more weight than a slam would have. There was something in that soft click that felt more permanent than noise. In the silence that followed, Jin Hae-won finally looked away from Rose's face. He looked down at the contract on the table. He looked at it for a long moment, like a man reading a document he has already read and is seeing clearly for the first time. Then he looked at Clifford Marsh with an expression so quiet and so absolute that Marsh, a man who had clearly not flinched at a negotiating table in decades, actually shifted in his seat. Not dramatically, just slightly, just enough. Rose took a step back from the table. Her part was done. More than done, probably. She was almost certainly about to be fired, and she had already made her peace with that, somewhere between picking up the water pitcher and walking through that door. Some things cost what they cost. You pay them or you don't, and you live with whichever choice you made. She had lived for 3 years with the knowledge that she had been too slow to see what was coming. She had no interest in making that same choice again in the other direction. But as she turned to leave, Jin Hae-won spoke for the first time since she had approached the table. Korean, low and unhurried, not directed at anyone specific, more like something said to the room itself. Something spoken aloud because holding it in was no longer the right option. Ali by the door heard it. His expression shifted by the smallest possible fraction. The fraction was small enough that most people in most rooms would have missed it entirely. Rose noticed it. She noticed most things. It was both a gift and a burden she had stopped trying to choose between. Rose didn't catch the words. She understood some Korean, enough to hear the shape of things, the weight of a word without always having the word itself. But this particular thing he said, she didn't catch. She felt it though, the way you feel a piece of music before your brain processes what it is. The weight of it, the texture. Something real and unguarded said in a language she wasn't supposed to understand by a man who was not accustomed to being unguarded in any language. She walked out of the private dining room, back through the frosted glass, back into the warm ambient light and the quiet jazz and the expensive indifference of the Caldwell's main floor. The general manager, Gerald Whitmore, was waiting on the other side. Gerald Whitmore was a man who had built his entire professional identity on the architecture of composure. 15 years in Chicago hospitality management. He had seen things at the Caldwell that would have made other managers resign on the spot, and had absorbed every one of them without visibly cracking. He was the calmest human being Rose had encountered in her 5 months of working here. On her first day, she had watched him handle a situation involving a sitting senator, a missing reservation, and a tableside argument conducted in 3 different languages, all without once losing the specific quality of contained, professional serenity that was essentially his brand. He was not calm right now. His face had the careful, effortful composure of a man who is applying composure from the outside because the inside is not cooperating. "My office," he said, very quietly. "Please, Rose." She followed him past the white tablecloths and the soft candlelight and the oblivious wealthy people enjoying their $100 appetizers without any idea what had just happened 12 feet away behind etched glass. It was strange, Rose thought, how the main floor could hold all of this so completely. The music still low, the candles still lit, the couple at table 6 still leaning toward each other over their wine. While 12 feet away, behind frosted glass, an entirely different set of events had just permanently altered several people's evenings. Gerald closed his office door, turned to face her, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, and appeared to be conducting a rapid internal negotiation with himself about where to begin. "Do you have any idea," he said, and stopped, started again. "Do you have any idea who is sitting at table 11 right now?" "A man being defrauded," Rose said. Gerald stared at her for a full 3 seconds. The stare of a man who had prepared himself for several possible answers to that question, and that was not one of them. "That is not," he lowered his voice to something barely above breath, the voice you use when the walls might be listening and you would prefer they weren't. "Rose, that is Jin Hae-won. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Do you understand what that name means in this city?" She understood considerably more than he knew, but she kept her face neutral and let him say the rest. Some conversations you need to let the other person finish, not because you don't already know where they're going, but because they need to get there themselves. "I have spent 15 years, Gerald said with the specific, slightly exhausted energy of a man recounting a sacrifice that has just become pointless, building this room's reputation as the most trusted private dining space in Chicago. 15 years of absolute discretion, absolute non-interference. Every kind of conversation you can imagine has happened in that room. I have never, not once in 15 years, had a server walk into a private engagement and insert themselves into a business conversation between guests." He straightened his jacket. His hands were not entirely steady. "You are an extraordinary server, Rose. I want you to know I mean that sincerely. You are the best I have on this floor, but I cannot." "I know," she said. He blinked. "I know," she said again, quietly, without drama. "You have to let me go. I understand that." He looked at her for a long moment, and underneath the professionalism and the controlled panic, she could see something that might have been genuine regret. He was not a bad man. He was a man with a restaurant to protect and a set of obligations that predated Rose's arrival by 14 years and would outlast her departure by considerably longer. He was a man doing his math the same way she did hers on the 1st of the month, and the math was what it was. "I'm sorry," he said. She believed him. That mattered, in a small but real way. She nodded once and went to collect her things from the staff locker room. Her colleague Priya intercepted her before she got there, eyes wide and crackling with the specific energy of someone who has just witnessed something extraordinary and is still fully charged with the voltage of it. "Rose, what happened in there?" Marcus Lyle just walked out looking like he'd seen his own professional obituary, and Clifford Marsh hasn't moved, and everyone is saying, "I'm going home, Priya." "But what did you take care of yourself?" Rose hugged her. Genuine, quick, the kind of hug you give someone when you don't know when you'll be in the same room with them again, and you want them to feel that without you having to explain it. Then she picked up her bag and her coat and walked out through the Caldwell service exit, because the front entrance felt like too much performance for the moment, and she was done performing. The Chicago night met her at the door. Late October, a bite in the air that had no interest in being polite about it. Michigan Avenue hummed 5 blocks over, its Friday night energy carrying all the way to where she stood. Somewhere down the street, a restaurant had its doors open and music was spilling out onto the sidewalk, warm and indifferent and completely unbothered by the fact that Rose Daniels had just walked out of the best-paying job she'd had in 3 years, with nothing lined up, and a hospital bill at home that wasn't getting smaller. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building and did something she had not allowed herself to do in a very long time. She felt it, all of it, the fear, genuine, specific, the fear of a woman who has done the math and knows exactly what losing this income means for the next 3 weeks. The exhaustion, the kind that goes bone deep, the kind that isn't about sleep, but about carrying something heavy for a long time and finally putting it down. The specific grief of someone who has been surviving for so long they have forgotten what it felt like to simply live. And underneath all of it, stubborn, inconvenient, completely irrational, and more real than any of the rest, something that felt, for the first time in 3 years, almost exactly like relief. She had told the truth. Whatever came next, she had told the truth. Not because it was safe or strategic or likely to work out well for her, because it was the truth, and a man she didn't know was about to sign away something he should have been allowed to keep, and she had the specific and unusual ability to stop it, and she had been living for 3 years with the knowledge of what happens when you have that ability and you don't use it. She wasn't doing that again. She started walking toward the train. She didn't notice the man behind her until she turned onto the second block. She caught him in a darkened shop window, a reflection, a shape, a figure keeping pace about 20 feet back, with the unhurried, steady rhythm of someone who is not trying to catch up, but has no intention of falling behind either. Her body registered it before her brain fully processed it. Her stride evened out, her breathing slowed. Every instinct she had was telling her to move naturally, keep the pace, think fast. She turned left at the corner instead of right, the long route, the route that added 4 minutes and went past an all-night pharmacy that would have people in it. He followed. Then a second figure stepped out of a building entrance ahead of her, and Rose's stomach dropped with a clarity that was not fear exactly, but the specific biological alarm of a body that understands it, is in a situation that requires different responses than walking to the train. She stopped walking. The 2 men closed the distance, unhurried, almost casual, which was, somehow, more frightening than urgency would have been. Urgency has a quality of improvisation. Unhurried casualness means someone has done this enough times that it doesn't require rushing. The one in front was broad and heavy-jawed, wearing the blank professional expression of a man doing a job he has done many times before, without particular feeling about it. His right hand moved toward his jacket. Then 2 other men came from nowhere. That was the only way Rose could describe it afterward. Nowhere. One moment the street held 4 people, and the next it held 6, and the 2 new arrivals moved with a quiet, efficient, completely controlled precision that turned the situation entirely inside out in under 30 seconds. No weapons visible, no raised voices, no scene of any kind, no drama that the Friday night street would have noticed or remembered. Just movement, purposeful and absolute, the kind that communicates immediately and without ambiguity that the terms of every negotiation in this space have just changed. And then the 2 men who had been following her were simply no longer there, redirected, removed. Like a problem that had been solved before she fully understood she had it. Rose stood on the sidewalk alone, breathing harder than she wanted to admit, the cold air sharp in her lungs. On the pavement where the first man had been standing, a single card lay face down. She looked at it for a moment before picking it up. She turned it over slowly, a phone number. No name. The cardstock was heavy and cream and told her, as clearly as any letterhead could, exactly who it belonged to. She had seen this quality of card before, in a previous life. It was the kind of card that doesn't need a name because the weight of the stock is the name. She looked up and down the empty street. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at the screen for 3 full seconds. The same 3 seconds she had spent at the service station deciding about the napkin. Then she answered. Miss Daniels? The voice was measured. Korean accented English, even and unhurried. The voice of a man who had decided exactly what he was going to say before he made the call, and had no intention of improvising. Are you hurt? Pause. If this story has you locked in right now, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Okay. Back to the sidewalk. Rose exhaled slowly. No. Good. A pause that had texture to it, not empty, but weighted with the specific quality of someone choosing what to say next from a number of available options. Those men work for Nathan Cole, Clifford Marsh's vice president and the architect of tonight's arrangement. He identified you as someone who should be discouraged from speaking further about what you heard. Another pause. He will not have that opportunity again. The simplicity of that sentence, the absolute, unhurried finality of it. It should have frightened her more than it did. The fact that it didn't frighten her more was something she filed away to examine later when she had more bandwidth for self-reflection. Rose looked at the card in her hand. You had people watching me. I had people nearby, Jin Hae-won said. The distinction was slight but deliberate. He had thought about the language of this before the call. She could hear that. Is there a difference? Yes, he said simply. There is. She pressed her lips together. She understood the distinction he was drawing, and she understood why he was drawing it, and she was not certain she was fully convinced by it. But she also understood that this was not the moment to fully unpack it. The Chicago night moved around her, indifferent and glittering. Above the rooftops of the Gold Coast, the skyline caught the city's light and threw it back upward, beautiful and entirely unaware of everything that happened at street level. It never was. "Why?" she said, a silence longer than the ones before it. This silence had a different quality from the professional ones she had heard so far. This one was not the pause of a man managing information, it was the pause of a man finding honest words for something he had decided to say honestly. Because, Jin Hae-won said, honest people are genuinely difficult to find, and they are remarkably easy to lose. Rose had no immediate answer for that. She was not sure one existed. It was not the kind of statement that invited a response so much as a decision. "There is a Korean restaurant in Bridgeport," he said, "a place called Sora. You will not find it on any search engine. Be there tomorrow evening at 7. A pause. "Please." That last word arrived differently from everything before it, like it had been considered for a moment before being released, held briefly, then offered. Like it was not a word he used often, and he was aware of that, and he wanted her to be aware of it too. It landed with a weight that none of the preceding sentences had carried, which was somehow more effective than if he had said something designed to persuade her. She looked at the card one more time. "I'll think about it," she said. She hung up before he could respond, and stood on the sidewalk alone with her heart doing things she did not yet have the language for. That was a strange feeling for a woman who spoke 6 languages, not having the language for something. She noticed it. Then she went to see her mother. The hospital at night had its own particular quality. The visitors mostly gone, the corridors quieter, the pace of the staff different from daytime, more deliberate, less performance, just the work itself. Rose knew the route to her mother's room from the parking structure without having to look at the signs. She had walked it enough times that her feet knew the turns before she made them. Gloria Daniels was awake when Rose arrived at Northwestern Memorial, propped up against pillows, watching something on her tablet with the volume turned low, the way she always did late in the evening out of consideration for whoever was in the next room. She had always been that way, aware of the space other people needed, careful not to occupy more of it than was hers. Rose had inherited that quality, though in her case it had calcified over the last 3 years into something less considerate and more protective. She looked up when Rose walked in and read her daughter's face the way she had been reading it for 26 years, completely, accurately, without requiring a single word of explanation. She set the tablet face down on the blanket. She patted the edge of the bed. Rose sat down and told her everything. She had not planned to tell her everything. She had planned, on the drive over, to give Gloria the outline, got fired, had a reason, it's okay, and keep the rest for herself until she had processed it. But her mother was looking at her with that specific, patient attention that made withholding things feel not like privacy, but like a waste of a good witness. And so she told her everything. The contract, Rolf Bauer and the lie in German, Marcus Lyle's smile, what she had done and why, Gerald's office, the street, the men, the phone call. Gloria listened the way she had always listened, without interrupting, with the specific full-bodied attentiveness of a woman who understood that her daughter needed to be heard more than she needed to be advised. When Rose finished, the room was quiet except for the soft background sounds of the hospital doing its nighttime work, the distant hum of carts in the corridor, the low beep of a monitor from the next room, the particular silence of a building that runs all night while the people inside it sleep. Gloria was quiet for a moment, not processing. Rose knew her mother's processing silences, and this wasn't one. This was the silence of someone who has already arrived at a conclusion and is choosing the right words to deliver it. Then she said, "Who sent the men to protect you?" Rose looked at her hands. "The man from the restaurant, the powerful one, the dangerous one," Gloria said. A pause. "Yes." Gloria nodded slowly. The nod of a woman who has just had a suspicion confirmed. Not surprised, just confirmed. "And are you going to meet him tomorrow?" Rose looked at the business card, still in her hand. She had been holding it since she picked it up off the pavement. It was warm now from her palm. She turned it over, turned it back. No name, just a number, and the weight of the cardstock, which said everything the number didn't. "I don't know yet." Gloria looked at her daughter for a long, quiet moment. In the low hospital light, she looked both older and more herself than she did in the daytime, when the effort of looking well required some of the energy that was otherwise just her. The monitor beeped softly. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago always did, carrying on, enormous and layered, entirely without regard for the specific weight of things being decided in small rooms. Then Gloria picked up her tablet, turned the volume up just slightly, enough to be heard but not enough to disturb, and said, with the calm and complete certainty of a woman who has been watching her daughter for 26 years and knows exactly what she is looking at, "Yes, you do." Sora was not on Google Maps. Rose had searched 3 times. She had entered the Bridgeport address Eli had sent to her phone that morning, a text from the unknown number, no greeting, just a street address and a time, which was either efficient or ominous or both, and found nothing. No listing, no reviews, no photographs, not even the kind of placeholder that Google generates for businesses that don't have active accounts. Just a residential-looking block in the heart of Chicago's Korean community where the late afternoon air smelled of sesame and charcoal smoke and something faintly floral she couldn't immediately identify. Osmanthus, she thought, or something close to it. She almost turned back twice on the drive over. The first time on the expressway, when the entirely rational part of her brain, the part that had survived a fraud investigation and a collapsed career and 3 years of rebuilding herself from nothing with no assistance and no margin for error, reminded her, clearly and without drama, that she was a woman with $6 in her checking account, a sick mother, no job as of this morning, and absolutely no business whatsoever walking into a private meeting with a man whose name made experienced hospitality managers visibly sweat. The rational part of her brain was not wrong. It was almost never wrong. That was not the same as it being the only consideration. The second time was when she parked and sat in her car for 4.5 minutes. She clocked it because she was a woman who paid attention to specific details, and 4.5 minutes is not a small amount of time to sit in a parked car on a quiet block, staring at an unmarked wooden door in a building that could have been anything, a private home, a community gathering space, a room where certain kinds of conversations happened in the specific privacy of a place with no address. Then she thought about Gloria's voice, the absolute unhurried confidence of it. Yes, you do. Her mother had not told her to be careful. Her mother had not said, make sure you know what you're walking into. Her mother, who had every reason to worry, and who worried about nothing except Rose, had looked at her daughter's face and said with complete certainty, you already know what you're going to do. Go do it. She got out of the car. The door opened before she could knock. Of course it did. Ailey stepped aside without visible expression and gestured her in with the economical precision of a man who had reduced all nonverbal communication to its absolute minimum and found this more than sufficient for every situation he had ever encountered. She followed him through a narrow corridor that smelled of barley tea and cedar and something warm she couldn't immediately place, dried citrus maybe, or the specific warm wood smell of old books kept in a good room. And then the corridor opened. Without transition, without announcement, without anything to prepare you for it, into a room that made her stop completely. It was beautiful. That was the thing she hadn't been prepared for. Not beautiful the way the Caldwell was beautiful, all glass and controlled light and the particular performance of expensive taste. Not the kind of beautiful that costs money and wants you to notice that it costs money. Something quieter than that, more considered. Paper lanterns casting warm amber light from above, their glow uneven and organic in a way that electric light never quite achieves. Dark, rich timber walls, a long table dressed simply, 2 ceramic cups of tea already poured, a small dish of banchan at the center, no unnecessary centerpiece, nothing performed. Korean ink paintings on the walls, the kind that take years to learn and decades to master, the kind that rewards looking at them twice. The kind of room that tells you something true about the person who uses it. The kind of room that says, I have enough, and what I have I chose for meaning. Jin Hae-won was already seated. He stood when she entered. That surprised her more than the room did. She had not expected that. A man of his specific kind of power, in a room built for his private use, standing up when a woman who had been carrying his water glasses 24 hours ago walked through the door. It was such a precise, particular gesture. It communicated something she didn't have language for yet, but filed carefully for later. He gestured to the seat across from him and waited, actually waited, stood there and waited, until she was seated before he sat down himself. Ellie moved to the far wall and became part of the room in the way he always became part of whatever room he was in. Rose made a private mental note that she and Ellie were probably the 2 most experienced invisible people in this building, and the symmetry of that was not lost on her. Jin Hae-won looked at her across the table. In the warm lantern light, he looked different from the private dining room at the Caldwell. The controlled, absolute composure was still there. It was simply how he existed, she was beginning to understand. The way breathing was simply how other people existed. But something was slightly different tonight. The professional distance was present but not fully deployed. like a man who had made a deliberate choice about exactly how much armor to bring to this particular meeting and had left some of it at the door. He spoke in Korean. Eli translated from the wall, quiet and neutral as a clock. You came. You asked, Rose said. Something moved in Jin Hae-won's expression. Not quite a smile. The memory of a smile, maybe. What a smile looked like in the moment before it decided whether to fully commit. I ask many people many things, Eli translated. They do not always come. I'm not many people, Rose said. The not quite smile got closer before he brought it back under control. He lifted his tea, drank slowly, set the cup down with the deliberateness of a man who does nothing carelessly and nothing without intention. Tell me about yourself, Eli translated. Rose looked at him evenly, held his gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. You already know. She let that land. You said last night to find out everything about her past, carefully. She held his gaze without blinking. Didn't you? A pause. Eli's eyebrows moved approximately 1 millimeter, which, she was already beginning to understand, was the equivalent of a fully visible expression of shock for either of the two men in this room. Jin Hae-won considered her for a moment with the focused attention of someone recalibrating. Then, you understood what I said. In the restaurant. In Korean. Some of it, she said. Not all. It's not one of my 6. She wrapped both hands around her tea, feeling the warmth of the ceramic against her palms. But I've spent enough time in enough rooms with enough languages to pick up the edges of most of them, the weight of things, even when I don't have every word. She met his gaze without blinking. You should probably know that going forward, if there is a going forward. He absorbed this without visible reaction, not dismissing it, not alarmed by it, just adding it to whatever model he was building. Then Eli, reading from what was clearly a file prepared before this meeting, said quietly and without preamble, Rosa Diazy Daniels, certified translator, 6 languages, former partner at Daniels and Channing Language Services, Chicago. License suspended 3 years ago following a fraud investigation that the available evidence now strongly suggests was engineered primarily by your business partner, Derek Channing, who has subsequently been linked to at least 2 similar operations in different cities. A pause. The fire crackling in the small grate near the wall. The amber lantern light. You took a service job to keep paying your mother's medical bills. The room was very quiet. You have been surviving, Jin Hae-won said, through Eli, and his voice on that sentence was not unkind. It was something more careful than unkind, something that acknowledged without minimizing. When you should have been working. Rose kept her face still. It cost her something, not anger. Just the particular effort of holding composure when someone has accurately named a thing you have been trying not to name for a long time. Is there a point coming? Yes. He set down his tea, looked at her directly across the table, not through Eli, not at the wall, at her. I want you to work for me, as my personal translator. Every negotiation, every contract, every room where language is the difference between what is real and what someone is trying to make me believe is real. A pause. After last night, I think you understand better than most what that difference costs. There it was, clean and direct, no performance around it, no charm deployed in its service, just a man who had decided what he wanted and said so, with the simplicity of someone who has long since stopped seeing any advantage in saying things indirectly. Rose looked at him for a long moment. The lantern light moved between them, casting small warm shadows. Outside, in the Bridgeport evening, Chicago carried on with its ordinary Friday night. Someone's music from an upstairs window, the distant sound of the expressway, the specific quality of a neighborhood that is simply itself, not performing itself for anyone. I know what you are, mister. Jin, she said, quietly, carefully. Not an accusation, just a fact laid on the table between them like the 3rd cup of tea nobody had poured. A fact she was willing to sit with and that she needed him to know she was willing to sit with honestly. He didn't flinch, he didn't deflect or reframe. Yes, Eli translated. My business is complicated. Some of it operates within conventional legal frameworks. Some of it does not. All of it is mine. He held her gaze. What I am offering you is legitimate, documented, properly compensated. You would translate, nothing more. And if I hear something I don't like, she said. He looked at her. Just for a moment, something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening slightly. You heard something you didn't like last night, Eli translated. You told the truth anyway. The almost smile again. Closer this time, warmer. The kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself. I am not afraid of that, Jin Hae-won said. I am counting on it. Rose looked at her tea. The ceramic was warm against her palms. She thought about the hospital bill in the kitchen drawer, about Gloria's face in the lantern light, about 3 years of making herself small and quiet and invisible in rooms where she understood everything being said and said none of it. She thought about the specific, particular weight of silence when you know the truth and choose, for reasons of self-preservation or fear or simple exhaustion, to let the lie pass. How that weight accumulates. How it had accumulated in her, slowly and completely, until last night when she had finally set it down. She looked up. The work needs to be completely separate, she said. Whatever else your organization does, I don't see it, I don't know about it, I don't translate it. I work negotiations and contracts only. Ellie translated. Jin Hae-won nodded once. Agreed. I set my own rate. Agreed. And if I ever hear something at one of your tables that I believe is wrong, she held his gaze steady and unhurried. I will say so, directly to you. Exactly the way I did last night. Something changed in his face when she said that. Not dramatically. This was not a man who did things dramatically. But it changed. Subtle and real and deep. The way changes are when they actually matter. The way a person looks when they hear something they had, without fully realizing it, stopped expecting to hear. Something that had been held carefully in reserve, letting itself come slightly forward. Agreed, he said. And his voice on that third agreement was quieter than the first two. Like the word had traveled a different distance to get there. The room settled into a silence that was not uncomfortable. The specific, full kind of quiet that arrives when two people have said something real and are both choosing to give it the space it deserves, rather than immediately filling it with something smaller. Then Eli spoke from the wall, unprompted, voluntary. The first time all evening he had offered words that were not translation, not logistics, not a door being opened or a coat being retrieved. The tea is getting cold. Jin Hae-won looked at him, the look of a man who is deciding whether to address the interruption or simply absorb it. Eli examined the paper lantern directly above them with great and apparently sincere interest, and Rose, for the first time in a very long time, longer than she could have told you if you'd asked, longer than the 3 years since Derek, but possibly longer than that, back to some earlier version of herself who laughed without checking whether it was appropriate. Laughed. A real laugh. Unplanned and unguarded, startled completely out of her by the pure, perfect, absurd unexpectedness of the moment. A sound so natural and unguarded in that quiet room that it seemed to briefly rearrange the air. Jin Hae-won watched her laugh, and something in his expression, unplanned, unguarded, completely and visibly uncontrolled for the first and only time since she had known him, was the most honest thing she had seen on his face since she had walked in. He looked away first, reached for his tea with the deliberate composure of a man returning to himself. We should discuss your compensation, he said through Eli. His voice was very slightly different from before, not dramatically, just slightly, a degree or two warmer, the controlled distance reduced by a specific and unmistakable fraction. She noticed. She was nearly certain he knew she noticed. Neither of them mentioned it, that the room had changed. Something warm and complicated and full of things that didn't have names yet had settled into the space between the lamps and the tea and the ink paintings on the wall. Something that hadn't been there when she walked in and would still be there when she walked out. And outside, in the Bridgeport evening, Chicago carried on. Loud, layered, gloriously and completely unbothered. While inside Sora, over cooling tea and carefully chosen words, something quietly and irrevocably began. Okay, I need to stop here for a second. What do you think just happened in that room? Drop it in the comments. Are you Team Rose right now? And what do you think she's walking into? I read every single comment. Tell me. Now, 3 weeks later, Rose Daniels sat at a glass-topped conference table on the 29th floor of a Streeterville high-rise and translated a $35 million commercial real estate transaction with the same quiet, unhurried precision she had once used to carry water glasses across a rooftop restaurant. Different table. Different floor of a different kind of building. Same hands, same voice, completely different woman. It wasn't just the clothes, though the structured blazer was different from the white server shirt, and sitting rather than standing did something different to how a room received you. It was the way she occupied the space. In the Caldwell, she had been expertly invisible. Here, she was entirely present. She was the room's working center, the point through which everything had to pass to be understood, and she held that position without any of the anxiety that might have accompanied it 3 weeks ago. She had been in rooms like this before. Her body remembered. The negotiation was between Jin Hae-won's holding company and a consortium of Chicago developers. Legitimate, fully documented, structured under the oversight of a contract attorney Jin had brought in from Seoul, specifically because, as Eli had relayed to Rose without expression, delivering the information as a statement of fact rather than a compliment, Mr. Jin no longer retains translators he has not personally selected. She had translated every word faithfully, every objection heard and conveyed with precision. Every term examined without softening, without smoothing over, without the particular kind of helpful imprecision that translators sometimes unconsciously introduce when they want the negotiation to go a certain way. She had done the job the way she had always done the job when the job was hers, completely. When the session concluded, Graham Fitch, the lead developer, a broad, direct man from the North Shore who had arrived clearly expecting to run the table and had, over the course of 3 hours, been consistently and politely denied that particular experience, leaned back in his chair and said, with what sounded like completely genuine respect, "Miss Daniels, I've been in negotiations for 25 years. I have never once in that time felt so clearly understood by the other side of a table." Rose thanked him and gathered her notes. Across the room, Jin Hae-won was shaking Fitch's hand, his expression professionally open in the way it became at the end of a successful meeting. But she could feel his attention the way you feel a change in air pressure before the weather shifts. Not seeing it directly, just aware of it, present against her awareness the way a specific frequency is present even when you're not consciously listening for it. She had been feeling it for 3 weeks. That was the thing no one warned you about. Nobody told you when you agreed to work in close proximity to a man like Jin Hae-won about the small things, not the danger. She had anticipated the danger and made her peace with it. Not the complexity of his world occasionally pressing against the edges of her clearly defined role. She had held those edges without difficulty, with the same discipline that had always been her strongest professional quality. The small things, the things with no rational business mattering as much as they did. The fact that he stood every single time she entered a room, every time, without exception and without comment, as if it was simply what one did and always had done, as if it required no acknowledgement, because it required no explanation. She had noticed it the first time, and the second, and by the third she had stopped being surprised, and started being aware of what it cost him in no particular way to do it. The fact that over 3 weeks he had learnt exactly how she took her coffee, a detail she had never stated aloud, had never been asked about, had simply existed as a preference she enacted quietly at every opportunity, and it was simply always there when she arrived. Present, correct, waiting, no mention of it, no gesture toward being noticed for noticing. Just there, the way things are there when someone has been paying careful, quiet attention, the way he listened when she translated. Not with the half-presence of a man processing information while running parallel calculations in his head, the way most people in rooms like this listen to everything, partially, instrumentally, with his complete self, his full attention. Like every word she spoke was the thing in the room that mattered most, because for him, apparently it was. The way he had said her name on the phone that first night, Rose, deliberate, with the specific, considered weight of a man who had been thinking about which syllable to put the emphasis on before he opened his mouth. She thought about that more than she wanted to admit, even to herself. Especially to herself at 2 in the morning when the apartment was quiet and the thinking was honest. And she thought about what Eli had let slip 4 days ago, said with a particular indirection that she had come to understand, over 3 weeks, was Eli's version of a deliberate choice. That Jin Hae-won had restructured his entire negotiation schedule around her availability, not worked around it, restructured, moved things, rearranged, for her. She had not acknowledged this information to Eli when she received it. She had filed it somewhere quiet and returned to work. But it was always there now. The boardroom emptied, the specific energized exhale of a room full of people who have just completed something significant. Jin Hae-won exchanged final words with Graham Fitch near the door. Eli materialized at Rose's elbow with her coat. She had stopped being startled by his sudden appearances, which she privately recognized as a form of adaptation she should probably examine more carefully at some point when she had the bandwidth. "Mr. Jin would like a word," Eli said. "If you have a moment." She had a moment. She told herself it was professional courtesy. She was not entirely convincing, even to herself. The room cleared. Jin Hae-won stood at the floor-to-ceiling window. Chicago spread beneath them in the late afternoon, the lake an impossible flat blue-gray to the east, the river threading through downtown, neighborhoods and rooftops spreading in every direction, the entire layered, enormous, contradictory, beautiful city visible from up here in a way it never was from street level, where you could only ever see the piece of it immediately in front of you. He didn't turn immediately, he just looked at the city. She wondered, watching him, what he saw when he looked at it, whether he saw what she saw, or whether someone like him saw something different, a map of something else, obligations and territories and years of work accumulated into the shape of a skyline. "You did well today," he said. Eli translated from across the room. "I did my job," Rose said. "Yes." A pause. "You always do." He turned from the window, looked at her across the empty table. "That is less common than it should be." Rose held her portfolio against her chest and kept everything she had been carrying for 3 weeks exactly where she had placed it. Filed, managed, quiet. "Was there something specific, Mr. Jin?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, withdrew a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, her name written across the front in handwriting she recognized before she had finished reading it. The same clean, deliberate handwriting from the business card on the pavement 3 weeks ago. The same weight of cardstock, the same quality of deliberateness in every stroke. He crossed the room and held it out. She looked at the envelope, looked at him. "What is this?" "Something I should have said differently the first time," Eli translated, and didn't have the right words for in English. Her heart did something she was not going to acknowledge. Not here, not now. "You could have had Eli translate," she said. "No," Jin Hae-won said. "Just that. Just no." Direct and simple and complete. The way he said things he meant fully, and something in the simplicity of it, the absolute unqualified no, told her everything she needed to know about why this particular thing needed to come from him directly. She took the envelope. Their fingers didn't touch. The gap of air between their hands as she took it felt like something physical, like weather, like a specific season arriving. She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see clearly the quality of his attention. That complete, unguarded focus he gave her when he thought she wasn't watching. Except that she was always watching. She had been watching for 3 weeks and pretending otherwise with increasingly poor conviction, and from the way he was looking at her right now, she suspected he knew that. Rose. The way he said her name, every single time, like a decision that had been made before it was spoken. She took one small, necessary step back. "I'll read it," she said. "Later." Something in his expression flickered. Briefly, just a flash, unguarded in a way she had not seen before. Not hurt, exactly. The expression of a man who has extended something real and is holding very, very still to see what the world will do with it. The expression of someone who does not do this often and knows it and has done it anyway. He nodded once, stepped back to give her the space she'd claimed. She walked to the conference room door, stopped with her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. She didn't trust her face in that direction. "Thank you," she said, "for today." Both sides understood each other, completely, a pause that held more than the words around it. "That matters. It matters more than you know," he said quietly through Eli, "that you make it so." She left. The elevator ride down was 29 floors of Rose standing completely still with the envelope held in both hands, not opening it, just holding it, feeling the weight of it, which was light, and the weight of everything around it, which was not. The lobby, the revolving door, the cold October air, which hit her face like a decision. She walked half a block before she stopped. A massive oak tree on the sidewalk, roots lifting the concrete in long cracked ridges that everyone walked around without thinking about. Very Chicago, she thought. Very much a city that grows through whatever is in its way and doesn't apologize for the damage it does to the pavement. She opened the envelope. One card, cream, heavy stock. His handwriting, 4 words, Korean. She read them slowly. Her lips moved almost imperceptibly. 6 languages living in her like a second structure, a second skeleton, holding her up the way bones do, always present, always working, even when she had spent 3 years pretending they weren't there. 4 words assembled themselves in her mind with the automatic fluency of something that has lived in a person since their 20s and does not forget itself no matter how long it goes unused. Her eyes closed. The oak tree moved above her in the October wind. Somewhere on the street behind her, a musician was playing something slow and warm on a keyboard set up on a fold-out table. the melody low and unhurried, the kind of music that has no agenda, that doesn't want anything from you, just exists in the air and lets you find it if you need it. Her phone rang. She knew before she looked. She knew the way you know things that have stopped being surprises and have become, gradually and without announcement, simply what happens. She answered. Silence first, just the soft ambient presence of him on the other end of the call. She had learned the texture of his silences over 3 weeks, the way you learn any landscape you move through daily, each one different. This one was unlike any of the others, quieter, more exposed. The silence of a man who has put something real into the world and is waiting, with everything he has, with the specific vulnerability of someone who does not do this, to find out what comes back. You read it, he said through Eli. Not a question. Not a question, she said softly. You always know. A pause. First time, saying my name. His voice was lower than she had heard it, the translation coming through a half-beat behind, Eli's measured tone catching up to something that had moved faster than translation usually does. First time, since you began working with me. She had said it in the elevator to herself. She had said it in her apartment at 2 in the morning when the thinking was honest. She had not said it to him until this moment. You can't write things like that, she said. Her voice was barely above the level of the street, which was still there, the keyboard, the traffic, the city, all of it continuing without reference to any of this. Not to me. A silence. Long. The trembling, specific fullness of 3 weeks of careful professional distance held between two people who have been in the same rooms every day, making their faces say other things. I know, he said. His voice was different now. The armor that was always present. Not aggressive armor, but the particular controlled distance of a man who has found distance useful and has been using it for a long time, was simply gone. Not lowered, not reduced, gone. Just a man on the other end of a call who had written 4 words in the language that held what English, for him, apparently couldn't. Then why? She whispered. The keyboard hit a note on the street behind her that was so precise and so clear it seemed to be answering a question it hadn't heard asked. The kind of note that simply rings true. Because, Jin Hae-won said, and for the first time she heard it without waiting for the translation, heard the Korean directly before Eli's voice came through. I have been in every kind of dangerous room there is. Rooms with weapons, rooms with contracts worth more than cities, rooms where the wrong word ends everything. A pause. Rose counted her own heartbeats in it, and I have never been as afraid as I am right now. The street musician played on. Chicago did what Chicago always does, held everything within itself without apology, enormous and layered and entirely indifferent to the specific, extraordinary weight of individual moments happening at street level. It had been doing this for a long time. It would keep doing it long after everything being decided on this particular sidewalk, under this particular tree, on this particular October afternoon had resolved itself one way or another. Rose stood under the oak tree whose roots had broken the sidewalk and just kept growing anyway, one hand pressed against her coat pocket where the card was, 4 Korean words warming through the fabric against her palm. She thought about what those 4 words meant. Not the translation, she knew the translation. She meant what they meant. What a man like Jin Hae-won saying those particular words to her specifically on a cream card in his own handwriting, in the language he spoke rather than the language she worked in. What that meant for the both of them and for whatever came next. She thought about a hospital room in Northwestern Memorial and a woman who had never once, in 26 years of watching her daughter navigate a world that didn't always make room for her, told Rose to make herself smaller, who had instead, from a hospital bed, said, "Yes, you do," with the calm and complete certainty of someone who knew her daughter better than her daughter knew herself in certain moments. She thought about a room full of paper lanterns and cooling tea and ink paintings chosen for meaning and a man who stood when she walked in without making it a gesture, without needing her to notice. She thought about 3 years of invisibility and a single evening in a rooftop restaurant where she had decided, in the space of one breath, to be visible instead. What that had cost, what it had opened. She thought about the complexity of what she was standing at the edge of. She was clear-eyed about that. She had always been clear-eyed about things when she let herself be. His world was not a simple one, and she was not going to make it simple by pretending. There were parts of it she understood, and parts she was only beginning to see the shape of, and parts she might never fully see. She had set her terms. He had agreed. She would hold them. But beyond the terms, beyond the work, the contract, the professional clarity she had built and would keep, there was this. There was the oak tree and the 4 words and the voice on the phone that had said the one true thing. She thought about the specific way he said her name, and she thought, whatever this is, it is real. And real things are worth something even when they are complicated, especially when they are complicated. She folded the card back into her pocket, pressed her palm flat against it for one moment, one deliberate moment of acknowledging the weight of it. Then she took out her phone. "I'm going to see my mother," she said. A pause. "I know," he said. And then, the question sat between them in the Chicago air, open and full and carrying everything neither of them had said yet. Everything there was still to say, still to decide, still to be honest about in rooms they hadn't entered yet. Rose looked up at the city, the skyline going amber in the late afternoon, building by building catching the October light, the lake a cold grey-blue line at the far horizon, steady and enormous and entirely indifferent. The whole impossible, complicated, beautiful city just carrying on the way it always did, the way it would keep doing, holding everything without understanding any of it. And then, she said, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The sentence was finished. Not with words, with everything else. With the 4 words still warm in her pocket, and the tea that had gone cold in Bridgeport 3 weeks ago, and a hospital room on the 4th floor of Northwestern Memorial, where a woman was watching a tablet with the volume turned low and waiting for her daughter to come tell her what happened next. She hung up, stood under the oak tree for one more second, the music still playing, the city still holding everything without knowing what it was holding, and then she started walking. And if there was something different in the way she moved, something lighter, something that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago when she walked out of the Caudwell with a white apron over her arm and nothing lined up, and a folder of hospital invoices waiting in her kitchen drawer, well, Chicago was full of stories. It had always been full of stories. Every person on every block was carrying one, and most of them would never be told, and that was fine. That was how most stories went. But this one was different. This one was just getting started. If you made it all the way here, if there was a moment in this story that landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to land, a line that stayed with you after, a scene that made you hold your breath without realizing you were doing it, I need you to tell me which one. Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one. I save the ones that surprise me. Tell me which moment broke you first. Was it Rose walking back into that private dining room with the calm of a woman who had already paid? Was it Gloria saying yes you do from a hospital bed with the certainty of a woman who knows her daughter better than her daughter knows herself? Was it the card with 4 words? Or was it the call? The man who has been in every kind of dangerous room there is, rooms with weapons and cities worth of money, telling the truth about the one thing that actually frightens him. Tell me. I'll be in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. New story every week, and I will see you in the next one.